Yeah.
George Kilpatrick Inspiration for the Nation, celebrating people we feel good about. Dr. James Patterson, the hip hop scholar, the author, the writer, the producer. You're doing all kinds of things, brother. What is new in your world? Good to see you again.
To see you too, brother Kilpatrick. We saw each other over the weekend because we both have reasons to visit my beloved Durham, North Carolina. I was there for a couple of reasons, one of which is the 30th anniversary of my graduation from Duke University. I can't believe I graduated from college 30 years ago, bro. But I was there for that, and we share a fraternity brotherhood, and roots to the Qs out there. And I was there also to serve on the planning processes for our 50th, which is coming up next year. And it's weird because we had the scheduling snafu last week, and so when we talked, I was like, "Hey, I'm headed down North Carolina." You were like, "I'm headed down to North Carolina too." So that's how God works in the lives of
What are the chances, right? Like, same city.
yeah, just insane. So, and you know how it is too. When you travel at my age, when you travel on the weekends, come back to your work week, it's like,
Oh man, Monday was tough, bro.
yeah, Monday was
And I told you about my travel
oh man.
all around the world. But how does it feel to be an alumni of one of America's hated teams?
Such a good question. I mean,
Duke Blue Devils, by the way.
yeah. So I went to Duke obviously 30 years ago. So that's between 89 and 93, right?
Yeah.
So I was literally there for back-to-back national championships, the first Krzyzewski championships. And so I went there at a time where Duke was not quite as hated as it has become to be hated. And so
right.
And it's very hard to describe what it feels like to be at an institution like that. I mean, it's a great academic institution with all the
research, right? A very top rated research
yeah,
institution.
It has all the challenges of predominantly white institutions, though. But to be there at a time where a basketball program emerges like that, it's just the excitement is electric. And so coming out of that, as the hate for Duke grew, I just wore it as a badge of honor. I mean, it's worth it to me and I got close friends who hate Duke and
like
express
for real, right?
on a regular basis. But it's worth it to me because the trade-off for that, bruh, is that it's years of it's like perennial excellence. It's years of that basketball program being competitive, like literally decades of that basketball program. It has made me a super fan of the NCAA's. I watch the tournament every year, and even though Duke didn't get that far this year, they're competitive like every year or for 30 years, just about. They've been competitive.
And they're always, it's kind of funny, and they're always considered for the Final Four. Like if you have Duke in your bracket, you're gonna usually put them to be one of the teams, right? That's just the legacy.
That's right. It's easy to dare to dream if you're a true blue Duke fan, and that's worth all. It's worth all. It's just the same way like people hate the Cowboys, or the way that people hate the Yankees, or whatever. Right?
I'm a Yankee fan. Yes, I understand that hate, but they're also loved. I think that's the other piece. I don't know about Duke. See, I don't know other than the people in the triangle. I don't know who else. Oh, and then there's rivalries within that. There are Cowboy fans. There are lots of Cowboy haters. One, and then there are a lot of Yankee fans, and there are some Yankee haters. But there's a lot of Yankee fans. I'll just say that.
Yeah, for sure.
There are.
But the hatred directed at the Yankees stems from their excellence over decades and decades.
Right.
You're inside of that, and I'm an alum of that, right? So I'm inside of that. I don't mind the hate so much because I've experienced a lot of winning, bro. A lot of winning.
Yeah. On the other hand, I'm a Knicks fan, and I don't experience a lot of winning. But anyway, that's a whole other story. There's a couple of items in the news that I want to get your take on, and from the most recent thing is Jarl. What's the brother's name?
It's Ralph Jarl, I believe.
Ralph Jarl, right? And this is in Kansas City, Missouri. 16-year-old sent by his mom to pick up his twin brothers, who was who were at who was there, and so I saw this interview with Gayle King. So she explained what it was, and what she said was she was weary about an overnight. So she said they were supposed to go to a sleepover. That's what it was called.
Yeah.
And they were told, okay, well, you can stay till 10 o'clock. So she asked Ralph to go and pick up the kids. And the address is 115th Terrace versus 115th, whatever the other street is. They went to the wrong door. And he said that there wasn't much dialogue. He knocked on the door. The man shot him, and then when he was running away, shot him again. Shot him in the I want to say in the head, but right above the eye, whatever, and they were able to get the bullets out. And the brother survived, yo.
Yep, he survived. Thank God. Thank
God. And then you had this woman. So that's the guy's 84. He's white. Talking about he was terrified. He was scared for his life. That's the code for justification, right? Yeah. Is it stand your ground? Is that what it is?
That's the code. I mean, if that's the way they stand your ground. I don't know if Missouri has stand your ground laws, but the way that stand your ground operates is if you fear for your life, then you can use deadly force.
Right. Shoot first, ask questions later. I was scared, and so and then he didn't get charged right away, and then community outcry, and then he was finally charged with 2 felonies. But at the time it happened, he was released into the community. So we saw that. Yeah. Then we saw, and this was involving a white woman.
New York,
right here in New York. She went into the same thing. Went into the other thing I'll say about Ralph. Ralph didn't have his phone.
Yeah,
he didn't have his phone. So she just said, "This is the street." So that he wasn't able to do navigation. With this other situation, they were in the woods and went to the wrong house, and the guy came out and shot them. And then they had cell phones from what I read, but didn't really have service. So they're trying to get her help while they're trying to get service at the same time. So she did not.
But I don't believe she survived the gunshot wounds.
No, she did not. She did not. But there was a time lapse between being able to get her help and the attempt to save her life. Let me put it that way.
Right.
So you had that.
Oh man. I mean, I there's so much there to think about and unpack. I mean, one important data point is that even though we have these 2 stories emerging in the media at the same time, Black people are 12 times more likely to die by gun violence than their white counterparts in this country. And so, when we have these conversations around common sense gun safety or gun violence and gun control and things of that nature, we should keep that statistic in mind. There's a disparate impact in our community, a factor of 12 in terms of death by gun violence. But what strikes me about both of these cases is the inordinate and oftentimes extraordinary amount of fear that operates within and across our society. Like, fear animates so much of this violence. I mean, that's what we see in the police brutality cases quite a bit, is a certain kind of racialized fear and hatred that stems from that fear. But we've done a really good job through media, through NRA lobbyists and propaganda, through our sort of foreign policy and the mix of like immigration policy and the fear of the browning of the world and the darkening of the American demographic. And there's just fear all around us, Brother Kilpatrick, and that fear is animating a lot of this violence. I mean, I can in some ways understand the fear of being in a home and not wanting someone to break into your home. And I know a lot of people have that fear, but I wish people would kind of look at the data. Like, in a lot of communities, like, the likelihood of someone burgling your home or breaking into your home is like really, really small. Mm-hmm. I know for a lot of folks, data doesn't matter, but because of the kind of violence that we see around this fear, I wish folks could kind of take a closer look at the data points around home entry, home burglaring and that kinds of, especially violent home break-ins, right? Like the
Right.
large preponderance of home break-ins are not violent, right?
Right.
So it's just I don't know, the mix of gun culture and the culture of fear is really haunting me right now. It's something that sits with me a lot anyway, because I do a lot of journalistic work around here. I'm actually working on a series for the Philadelphia Citizen around gun violence, doing a few pieces about it and trying to look at some solutions oriented organizations that are trying to address it. And the data is disheartening. But when you see these cases, or when I see these cases, I think about the ways in which fear controls and drives so much violence in the world today.
And it seems to be even more, here's what I'm thinking about. Dr. James Peterson, hip hop scholars, founder, and you use hip hop as a. Tell me how you use hip hop as a tool to understand how we navigate society. Just before we continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way in which hip hop is one of the great purveyors of violent imagery in our communities today, and I think people who critique it for that are right to critique it in that sense. There's a lot of violence in the music, and in the contemporary forms of the music, especially drill music and sometimes trap music. We see a lot of artists who will forecast violence or tell on themselves in terms of the violent acts they commit.
We're hearing that in songs. It was a rapper, I forgot who it was, where he actually confessed to some things. I can't remember. This just happened.
No, we see that. I mean, I think that oftentimes it's very easy to confuse that kind of rap music as the root of the problem, when in reality it's a symptom of the problem. The root of those, or the roots of those problems, are abject poverty, lack of access to opportunities, the erosion of our residential infrastructure across our major cities, the depleted funding of our public education system, and a host of other things, right? There are some root causes there. Rap lyrics are generally a symptom of that. The symptoms don't make it better, right? But they're symptomatic of deeper root causes. I get frustrated sometimes, though, Brother Kilpatrick, because people don't also look to the artists within hip hop culture who speak back against that and who critique that and who are trying to think together within a community of practitioners and listeners of rap music to move beyond the celebration and glorification of things like misogyny and the violent ways in which some artists create, perform, and deliver their art. So the one piece is we shouldn't confuse the symptom with the sickness. And the other piece is there are a lot of artists who rap against those things, or who think differently about those things, who critique those artists. That's a great artist. There's a lot of great critiques of violence in hip hop, produced and created by rap artists, and not enough people embrace that or lift that up as one of the antidotes to the symptomatic sense of violence that emanates from rap music. But listen, we could erase every violent rapper today, Brother Kilpatrick. Two things will happen tomorrow. There'll be thousands of rappers that step into the place, talk about the same thing.
Right.
The violence and the shooting would continue as well.
It's funny you mentioned a couple of things, and what I was thinking is, people will say to you, and you heard this argument, we're only hearing from authentic voices about their own conditions, and that what the real problem is there not that there's not quote unquote conscious rap and lyrics speaking out against, is that what's promoted or what's sold or it's what we're consuming. Like, that's what I think. In other words, we could choose not to hear drill music or trap music, if you will. Drill music. Would you explain that to somebody that doesn't know?
Drill music is a subset of rap music within hip hop culture that merged out of Chicago and the Midwest area. that directly sort of platforms violence, sometimes gang violence, drug use, sometimes drug abuse. But it does also at times give you some of the gritty and the more bluesy kind of detail around inner city conditions. And it's been taken up and kind of become popularized in other regions, but it originates out of Chicago in the Midwest.
So you have this, I don't want to call it a battle between, is it simply a battle between so-called good and evil, or the fact that there's not enough balance? Because some people will say, well, we need to hear those authentic voices that you just described. And then I don't know who's the conscious rapper that's selling millions of records right now. Because doesn't money like duplication, or duplication likes money? I don't know what the saying is, but in other words, if you had that, wouldn't you have more of that? But because we continue to gravitate towards the other thing, if you will, or the quote unquote.
I think that so I'm against censorship of any form, pretty much.
Right.
Which means I'm less interested in telling a rapper what they should say on a record, and more interested in making sure that their audiences, especially the young people in their audiences, have the critical media literacy tools to decipher and discern and interpret what those artists are saying, right? So,
but see, wait a minute though.
If you
they don't have a PhD though.
You don't need a PhD, but you.
How do they do that?
Because, well, here's the thing: you want folks to make different consumer choices. You want them to consume music that's more constructive. Well, what I would say is we have to give them the tools to do that. How do they do it? Well, we have to change some of the ways in which we're educating young people. You know, like we have to understand that there's got to be more media literacy in the classrooms at an early age. By the time, if we're giving 10-year-olds smartphones, and that's pretty common practice, whether you think it's sad or not, pretty common. If 10-year-olds have smartphones, access it to the internet, then that means that we should be doing media literacy classes, social media literacy classes in 4th and 5th grade.
That ain't happening.
That's not happening.
But you know why?
That's a paradigm shift that has to happen around public education and around things.
It's
right?
Not in the curriculum. It's not part, all across. I know they're doing testing this week. I know my wife is in, they're doing testing, right?
That's right.
It's not in there.
Nope.
I mean, what I'm saying to you, to me, what you're saying sounds like utopian vision. If we could only, now there may be some of the charter schools that could do that, but I mean, the idea that we become media literate and critical thinkers in 3rd and 4th grades around how we select music. Right? I think about, what was the
maybe
song?
It's utopian, bro, but I don't think we have a choice.
I understand.
I mean, we can frame it like there's a choice for us to do it or not to do it, but look at the consequences of us not doing it. I don't think we have a choice.
All right. So, okay. So is it being done anywhere, right? Because it's one thing to have the idea who's doing it, how do we replicate it? Because that's what I'm thinking. Okay, if somebody's figured out how to do that, then let's do it, because
it's being done. Look, it is being done. There's an entire school of thought and deep pedagogical and educational research around critical media literacy. It hasn't been brought to scale in terms of policy and curricular implementation, but the research is out there. The folks who work and consult with school systems are talking about these things. It just, in a society of our size and this slow around public education, it takes time. But I'm not saying anything new, right? Like, critical media literacy has been around for a while.
But what I'm saying to you is, if this is as critical as you say it is, then why is it moving at a Okay, so let me go another way with this. How can it be done and scaled? So, because what you're saying is the bureaucracy and all of that doesn't allow for it to infiltrate into the system. Okay, so bump the system, right? How do we do it independent of the system and scale it? In other words, we got to see that it really works. We got to see that our ability to form these critical that we can allow, that we can create critical thinking around musical choices for young consumers I would love to see somebody model and do it, not theoretically, but in practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In
And
practice, it is being done. Some churches are doing this. Many parents are doing this on an individual level, like
okay,
parents who have strict rules around limiting screen time.
right.
The parents who play video games with their children, the parents who, you know how, I don't know how old your children are, but my
They
children,
old.
my children are in their early 20s, right?
Right. Okay. So am I.
But about 10 years ago, from them when they first got their phones, you know how sometimes your kid will bug you to watch a video like, Daddy, look at this video, Daddy, look at this video. For some people, that's really annoying. For me, I'm always like, oh man, I want to watch it. I want to see what they're seeing. And sometimes they're so excited around the media they're consuming, they'll share it with you. Now, if you shut them down, you're shutting down an opportunity for you to make an intervention for them to help them become more literate about what they're consuming. And so I think there are a lot of parents and families that take that direct approach, and that's around limiting screen time, watching what your kids watch, sometimes playing what your kids play. I kind of was retired from video games for a long time. I mean, I played video games in college, but I kind of retired from it. But as my son started to get more and more into it, I realized I needed to pick it back up. I'm glad I did that because I gamed with him and we could talk about games and all that. So for example, like the super violent Call of Duty games,
right.
as I built that relationship with him, I was able to sway him in some ways to see how repetitive and mundane it is, how violent it is, and to point him in the direction of other games, role-playing games, more sophisticated games, more intelligent games. And now he doesn't really play those kind of games that much as a young adult, right?
Right.
He's still a gamer, but he plays games that aren't based upon like shooting and killing people every millisecond. So I think there is, and I hate to put this off on individual families. I'm not saying that. The society has a responsibility and a role to play here through public education. But if you want to see how it works, there are families, there are churches and church programs, there are after-school programs around media literacy. Like there are some things out there that show that this works.
If you can identify, my brother, a program that you know of that works, let's get those folks on and that's why I'm here, right?
Yeah.
I'm here to make sure that we understand if we need a problem solved, that somebody's doing it, and we want to direct people to how they can do it. Let's replicate.
Let's demystify it right now, Brother Kilpatrick, because when I say media literacy, it's no different from like literacy, right?
Right.
Like learning how to read, right? It's just about teaching young people to learn how to understand and interpret what they're consuming from screens. It's kind of like the rating systems for films, right? Unfortunately, we don't have that across social media. We don't have that in a way that's useful for kids who are engaged in the internet more than they'll ever engage TV, right? So, or even movies. So I'm talking about fundamental literacy, like understanding what you're watching and what you're hearing, understanding the sources behind some of the things. There was a big story that came out last week around like these popular Black websites. Like I don't even know the name, like the Shade Room and like Boss Up and
Media Taker, MTO,
World Star Media, right? All of these sites, people have been doing this, studying them now. This is media literacy. And again, this is journalists doing the work. So it's already been done. You can read about this right now. Just Google it. This is media literacy, though. They studied these sites. What did they find? That there are a lot of right-wing talking points coming from these sites, that the ownership of some of these sites is a little bit cloudy and we don't know, that somehow sites that are the most popular sites for Black folks are pushing anti-Black ideology. That's the kind of media literacy that we need. Now, this time it comes from journalism. I would like to see it come from our education system.
Yeah, I'll share that link. I saw that in a tweet. You put that out.
It's a much bigger story than people understand, bro. It really is.
Yeah. And so we all the way back to your thought about this idea about guns sensibilities, right? And it takes me back to the Justins, right? Justin Peterson, Justin Jones,
that's right.
the two
They'll
Tennessee
be at the White House
legislators.
next week, but they got a meeting with the president.
Really, right.
Tennessee 3 will be at the White House on Monday. Mm-hmm.
And for people that don't remember or don't recall, the two Tennessee lawmakers plus another woman, they were expelled from the state house for violating house rules, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And so
a protest of gun violence days after a school shooting in their constituency's region.
Let's make it clear, right? And then were reinstated by their respective districts, but now they have to run again to keep the seats because whatever, right? Because they were appointed back. And Justin Jones, I believe it was today or yesterday, came into session with a coffin, a child-sized coffin, and they didn't let him in. They said that it was funny. They didn't let him in, but I think about what they're protesting, and then I think about the number of tragic deaths within our communities in terms of this. I was listening to, who was I listening to? When I was asking about people confessing, and my daughter said, was Bobby Shmurda one of those? I don't know, but I'm just I don't know.
He talks about violence on records, and he has done jail time. So whether he confessed or not,
right. Put it on, but but that rappers are talking about what they're doing in the streets. In other words, but I guess what I remember, and I didn't know what this term meant. So, I was doing some work in one of our schools, and I asked the kid what did they want to be, and when somebody said I wanted to be a shooter, I now know what he meant, but at the time, this is how silly I'm thinking, oh, he wants to be LeBron. That's where I took it. Not that he wanted to be a shooter. Mm-hmm. That's what he aspired to. This is in middle school, 6th, 7th grade, and said, I want to be a shooter. And I'm thinking, whoa. And so you have that, and then you have all of these states around the country making it easier and easier and easier for guns to be purchased legally, if you will, but guns to be purchased. So I'm just trying to see, brother, where we at with all of this, and then you got the nonsense going on in Florida. So I'm trying to figure out in Tennessee, where are we going with all of this? And I'm really particularly concerned about the impact on us, our Black communities, where we're seeing the proliferation of some stuff.
We are 12 times more likely than our white counterparts to die from gun violence. You know what I mean? That's the data point, right? That's the fact. For the young man out there who wants to be a shooter, I wish I could just give him a hug. We need to talk to those brothers and kind of wrap our arms around them. Whatever he's seeing in his community makes him feel safer aspiring to be a shooter than to be a teacher, right? And so we got to wrap our arms around young folks like that are impressionable by what they see and what they experience and the fear that they feel trying to navigate their own communities and live their lives. Look, there's over 400 million guns in circulation in this country. There's only about 330 million, 400 million. Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's a lot of guns out there. We are losing the battle of gun control and common sense gun safety. The reason why the Justins are taking such profound measures is because young people can see the writing on the wall. It's a little bit harder for us, me and you, Brother Kilpatrick, to see it because we didn't grow up in a world where we're doing like shooting drills in school and like, wonder why that young man wants to be a shooter. He doesn't want to be on the other side of that gun.
Right.
But we didn't grow up with shooting drills. We didn't grow up with all these mass shootings. We didn't grow up with 400 million guns out here in the streets. We didn't grow, when I was a young person, there was an assault weapons ban in place in the early 90s. There was you couldn't buy no damn AR-15. That is not the case right now. And so we're losing on some fronts with that. And that's why you're seeing these young folks step up and be really extraordinary leaders. I mean, I think the thing that's amazing about the Tennessee State House debacle is that they had no idea how rhetorically and politically gifted those two young men were. The Republicans who expelled them, they had no idea. This is how dumb they are. They didn't understand the ways in which those young men would resonate internationally. They couldn't conceptualize it. And that's why they've been getting dragged since then. That's why the Tennessee Three is famous. That's why they're visiting Biden. That's why their campaign coffers are full. They're going to win those special elections by landslides. Both of them will. They're both national superstars because of that. But what they have decided to do is to use this new platform to continue to push the issue.
It reminds me of something that's being. So let me have you take a stab at the Justin Peterson controversy. I'm not Pearson, right?
Pearson, yeah.
Controversy. This idea, and I think Greg Hart at Howard talked about this, where the right wingers and even some of the brothers, what's the brother's name that hates everybody? I'm sorry. Tariq, that brother, whatever his name is. Yeah. You know,
he doesn't hate everybody, but I know who you're talking about.
He doesn't hate everybody. What's the stuff that he's talking about? So anyway, they're basically saying that they show videos of him when he was a student at Bowdoin talking about and now speaks like, you know, Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X combined.
That's right.
So
that's not a controversy, Brother Kilpatrick. He was trained in his rhetorical skills in the Black church in the South. So maybe he went away to school in Bowdoin. Bowdoin's all the way up in Maine. He had to code switch and navigate Maine. That's fine. But that's not an expose, right?
No.
Brother's trained in the tradition in the Black sermonic tradition. He didn't die after he left Bowdoin. He came back to Tennessee and became an ordained minister. You think that you wouldn't go to school with some Black ministers in Tennessee and not come out speaking like that? You got to have a better sense of what the Black experience is. Come on.
My concern is we're still trying to, what's the word I want to use? Police Blackness in our community. That's right. What I'm concerned about. Yeah. And that it has to show up a certain kind of way for you to be Black. Yeah. So from your perspective, you write about various things. What's the point of that?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of time researching the concept of Black authenticity when I was in graduate school, because I really was wrestling with it existentially, right? And I'll be honest with you, after reading about it for years and like writing about it and thinking it through and all of this, I mean, there's just no there for me, right? You know, Blackness is vast and it varies. And sure, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. I grew up in the hood. I grew up in Newark at a time where things were violent, not much more violent than what they are now, right? Like by any standards, the Newark I grew up in is way more violent than the Newark that exists right now, way more violent than the Philadelphia or Chicago that exists right now, right? Homicide rates through the roof, okay? Drug, we're talking about crack, you know what I mean? Epidemics, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That in and of itself doesn't make me any more authentic than anybody else. I mean, if you think that Blackness is defined by you having gone through some painful experiences, you are capitulating to this infrastructure of white supremacy. If you think that Blackness is defined by your oppression or by the terrible things you've gone through, or being poor, or growing up in drug-infested neighborhoods, or being addicted to drugs, or any of the pathologies that the media often associates with Blackness, if you think that's what defines it, you've capitulated to the infrastructure of white supremacy.
To me, what defines it is your ability to be who you want to be in everywhere you go in all the circumstances. Do you know why this show exists? This show exists for the very reason to counteract the thought of the pathological, if that's the word, thinking that Blackness, the pathology that Blackness has to show up a certain way. In other words, this show exists for the very reason that I'm trying to show us how we show up everywhere we go. Whether you're doing fencing, whether you want to ski, wherever you show up, it's Black because that's what you're doing. Wherever you live, wherever you're doing.
I am who I am wherever I show up. But that's what they're trying to get Justin Pearson on a little bit, because it looks like he's showing up a little bit differently in Bowdoin than the way he shows up on TV now. But I'm telling you, what's between those things is the Black sermonic tradition. And if you've ever been in a Black seminary or been around Black preachers enough, they are trained to speak a certain way. It's a part of the sermonic tradition profession. But listen. I remember I was in grad school and I went to Penn for grad school. And so a lot of my friends from Newark would come to visit because during Penn relays, which is a big deal in Philadelphia.
Right.
I remember one time we were all hanging out or whatever, and we're talking, chopping it up. And one of my friends from inner city Newark was like, "Man, JP, man, you're getting a little bit too bohemian out here in grad school. We're gonna have to pull your ghetto card. We're gonna have to revoke your ghetto card." I looked that brother dead in his face and I said, "Who's gonna take my ghetto card? Like who's gonna do it?" Right? And I didn't mean that in like a threatening way. I meant to just deconstruct what you're saying. Like, who's actually going to come to me and take anything from me? What are you talking about? It doesn't make sense. There's nothing. And that's what I mean by the debates around Black authenticity. There's not really a lot. There's not any substance there. Blackness contains multitudes, right? And it has to do that because of the vastness of our experiences, some of which is about struggle, but a lot of it's about endurance and triumph over that struggle. We tend to focus on the negative and focus on the pathologies too much because white supremacy sometimes tells us to do that. We have to think a little bit more inclusively about the vast range of our own experiences.
All right, what's on your mind right now? What's keeping you up at night right now?
Well, there are lots of things keep me up at night, actually, Brother Kilpatrick. A lot of things keep me up at night. I wonder what world we have bequeathed to our children some nights when I'm deep inside my own head. But I feel like, a lot of this violent stuff has been sitting with me. Like I said, I'm trying to write about it. That's the way that one of my coping mechanisms is to try to write through things. I'm not always good at it, but I try to write through some of these things. And so I've been wrestling a lot with how fear animates that. And the way in which fear functions as a constitutive element of racism itself. And so those are some of the things that I've been thinking about. I'll be honest with you, I was delighted to see the Justins emerge in the aftermath of the school shooting last week. Horrified by seeing the Sweet 16 birthday party shot up in Alabama, the bank shooting in Louisville. I mean, I challenge myself to not be desensitized to the violence that we're being exposed to on a daily basis. So that's just some of the things. I really wish that, or I hope that I've done what I can do to make sure that the world that my children and your children are becoming young and not so young adults in would be better than what it is. And so hopefully I can continue to do my part on that front.
I'll leave you with one of the topics that I wanted to get to before we go, and it's something you write about, is around masculinities. And I'm thinking about Frank Ocean, who's resurfaced. Maybe there'll be a song out, maybe and his sexuality as an artist and how hip hop is dealing with managing notions of masculinity within the culture and within the music. Where are we with that?
So first, I'm praying for Frank Ocean because he had to drop out of the headlining role of Coachella today.
I think
Blink 182 is going to take his place, and he's grieving, right, because he's lost a younger brother recently. Let me also say to your audience, I'm not objective about this. I'm a huge Frank Ocean fan. Frank Ocean makes stellar music.
Right.
The music he makes is extraordinary, and I love that Frank Ocean pushes, expands, and challenges the boundaries around heterosexual Black masculinity. We need Frank Ocean in this world. We need for people to understand that the hypermasculinity, or even what some folks might refer to as like traditional Black masculinity, has been infected and infested with patriarchy, and misogyny, and homophobia. And for me, the way this has always worked is like, as a community, we can't afford those things. Like, this is hard for people to wrap their heads around, bro. But like, we can't afford to be patriarchal. We can't afford to be homophobic. We can't afford to be misogynistic. Now, there are ethical things to think about there. We can talk about that. But for the people in this world who want to be pragmatic patriarchs or pragmatic misogynists, I say to them, like, we can't, our community can't afford that. You know, women have driven every movement upon which shoulders most of us now stand. They may not have been at the forefront loudmouth leaders, but the organizers, the driving forces behind it. Our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters, some of our greatest writers, some of our greatest activists, right? Like, we need Frank Ocean because he's a symbol of what Black masculinity can be outside of the confines of some of the patriarchal, misogynistic, and homophobic structures that dominate how we see Black masculinity, even in the 21st century.
Answer this question then, or answer this what some Black men are saying, that from a media representation standpoint, right? We have to put on a dress. Of course, Billy Porter, and you got to love what Billy Porter is doing, which is living out loud without apology, right?
Yep.
How do we make room for that? And I think you gave us the blueprint just a second ago, but even because when you hear the brother say, they're saying that there's this attempt through white supremacy to emasculate.
Yep.
This is the historical. I'm not telling you nothing you don't already know.
That's right.
How do we sit with the understanding of that to be inclusive? Because you said we don't have time for that. How do we drive that home even further when
I said we can't afford to discriminate against people in our own community. But right. So, Brother Kilpatrick, this is way more complicated than we have time to.
I didn't. It was on my mind. I need to get it in there.
So listen. First, let me just say, I do want to, and I do this. I have friends who think this way. I listen to my friends or mentors or colleagues or younger people in my family sometimes, or sometimes Black women will say the same thing. I try to listen to that argument that you just made. I try to listen to it, and when I look at cable news and when I look at media, you know, I'm a pop cultural scholar, so I consume a lot of media. Like, I have to watch things sometimes to be able to write about it. And so I watch a lot of things so I can write eloquently and hopefully informed about some of those things. And there is something to that argument, right? Which is that, and I don't know if this is a conspiracy or a plot, but sometimes it feels like our media is more comfortable with non-heterosexual iterations of Black masculinity. So it's hard for me when people, this is why I have to start to listen to that, bros, because they bring the evidence. People are bringing me receipts. Like, you see this show, you look at this, you see this show, you see the who's on these cable news shows, you see the right? And you see this Black man on TV with his fingernails painted, or you see this, right? Like, they bring all this evidence and they feel like there's a systemic attempt to emasculate Black men. Now, I don't say this to my friends, but I'll say this to you. So I'm not intimidated by that. I don't feel like my Black masculinity is being attacked or undermined by that, right? And what I want to say to those folks, and sometimes I'll share with them this particular insight, which is Black masculinity is going to be stronger when it can be as inclusive as it needs to be, when it can contain the multitudes that I say Blackness contains, and when we're not easily intimidated or undermined or feel emasculated by seeing a gay Black man on TV, right? It could be true that the media is more comfortable with that kind of imagery, or even maybe the media wants to promote that. But we have to have a version of Black masculinity that's not intimidated by that, that absorbs that and is inclusive of that and understands that's a part of what Black masculinity is. Now, again, the people who are making that argument, they don't want the Tariq Nasheeds of the world, they don't want to hear that shit from me. They don't. Right. But I'm sorry, I'm not like, I literally am not intimidated by or like afraid of that, or, you know, it doesn't impact me. It hits me differently, I think, than maybe what it does some other folks.
And you're also seeing different versions of Black masculinity in pop culture media. You think about Omar, one of the iconic characters of all time.
How do you not love Omar?
Right? Of The Wire.
I mean, he's ultra violent. He's a killer. He's a murderer.
Right.
How do you not love the complexity of his character?
And the same thing with different, like you look at what was it Jussie Smollett? He was in Empire, and more recently Drew on the Ghost Power series as that dude is an assassin at the same time, right? And so but more to come on this.
More to come, bro. Always more conversations for us to come. You and I can talk forever, of course.
Yeah. All right, listen. Dr. James Peterson, well, I didn't even introduce you throughout the whole show, but they'll find you. Listen, how we find you?
Best place to find me is on Twitter, at Dr. James Peterson.
There you go.
Until Elon Musk totally destroys it. Okay. I'll
know, right. I know, man. Yeah. Yeah. That's as my good friend Dr. Rick Wright would say, who is also a great brother of the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. That's another story. Listen, bruh, good to talk to you.
Always good to talk to you.
Keep up the good work. And thank you for the conversation, because I'm sure that listeners will have a lot to chew on and digest. George Kilpatrick, Inspiration for the Nation.
Salute, bro.